Hey y'all, it's Carrie, and this is Monstrous, Spooky Edition. All right, we have 2 spooky episodes left for this year, 2024. Before we dive into today's spooky episode, you are only going to be hearing my voice. I do not have a co-host for this episode. We are doing some changing. So next week we will have some announcements for you guys. I will have a new full-time co-host with me. But for this week, it is just me. So I decided to do something a little different that I have not done yet. Hopefully everyone likes it. So everyone says that baseball is America's pastime, right? But most of us weirdos would disagree with that. And we would say swapping ghost stories is America's pastime. But you have to do it right. You have to sit in a circle on the floor with the lights off. And if you're really feeling adventurous, you travel to your local cemetery or a known haunted location just to get that eerie feeling just right. To have the tension in the air, the tingle of nervousness that all brings the ghost stories together. Of course, in every group, you have your skeptic. There's no way these spooky stories are true. But if the setting is just right, even the skeptic might walk away wondering, what if it's true? Are there dark and mysterious things like spirits and demons around us? There are a lot of people who swear they see ghosts. Are they all lying, or could some of them be telling the truth? Could all of these mysterious, creepy things just simply be explained away by rational thought? Do Ouija boards, seances, and witchcraft truly work? Or is it all a bunch of BS to make money this time of year? Are you willing to suspend the disbelief? Are you willing to have an open mind that some of these things may just be real, even if your mind can't wrap itself around it? Not all things can be explained away by science or rational thought. So, dear listeners, gather round, grab your friend, and listen close. A couple of months ago, my friend's cousin, who was a single mother, bought a new cell phone. After a long day at work, she went home, put her phone on top of the counter, as many of us do, and went to watch TV. Her son then came around and asked if he could play on her new phone. So she told him not to call anyone or mess with the text messages, and he said okay. About 11:20, she started to get tired, so she decided to tuck her son into bed and go to bed herself. She walked into his room and seen that he wasn't there. So she ran off to her room to find him sleeping on her bed with the phone in his hand. Feeling relieved that her son wasn't missing, she picked the phone up and inspected it. Looking through it just to see what he was doing on it, she noticed only minor changes, like the background, banner, the things kids change. But then she opened up the photos that had been saved to her phone. She began to delete the random pictures he took, the 2 close-up pictures that every child takes. But then only one new picture remained inside her photos. When she saw it, she was in disbelief. It was her son sleeping on her bed, but the picture was not taken by him. The photo was taken by someone standing above him. In the photo, it showed the left half of an elderly woman's face. That is not something I want to find going through my phone and deleting random photos my children take. Ugh. Next, we have the ghost bro. So my house was built in 1904. It's a single family home, wood frame sitting on a concrete block foundation, like most homes in the 1900s. I've been living here for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and I have seen or heard in the house, this one event is my all time favorite. And it happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music, but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. So they would practice into the early evening and they would usually call it quits around 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and then went to bed because I worked the graveyard shift. This took place in late fall, so the days were getting shorter and they had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment. Everyone had filed out of the basement, but the tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, and through the kitchen doorway, down the hall, into the living room, and out into the front porch. Everyone was sitting outside of my brother's truck waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back for them. So now the basement is not clean. With full sight lines, there had been partisans made, and the boiler and main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he is about to retrieve his food container when out of the corner of his eye, he sees it. A shadowy figure right at his peripheral vision. The feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. He had been taught that if you were in the presence of a spirit or a ghost and you felt a bad vibe, to say a quick prayer or to cuss at it. My brother chose the latter. He basically told it, hey, fuck you, I don't have time for this shit. My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors, turning off lights as he was walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was wide open, and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as did the rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him. Still holding his food container in one hand, he jogged down the few porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his friend, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason to. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, put his seatbelt on, and got ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house. When one of his friends said, hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us? My brother asked, what do you mean? He went to work early tonight. He's already gone. Do you see his car anywhere? The next question that came out of his friend's mouth. So then, who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house? I'm not sure if I'll be going back to that food that I accidentally left as I'm leaving my house anymore. I think I might just leave it.
Our next ghost story is the rocking horse. One night when I was maybe between 10 and 12, I had trouble falling asleep. My bedroom was the entire top floor of our house, with my bed and such being on the left side and storage closets and a play area being on the right. I was lying in bed when I heard a weird noise from the other side of the room, and I saw my rocking horse begin to rock. It was sitting just outside one of the storage closet doors. It proceeded to rock its way halfway across the room and stopped dead under the ceiling light. At this point, I was freaking out and just buried my head under my blankets and never peeked out again until morning. It was all confirmed to not be a dream, as the rocking horse was still in the middle of my room when I woke up. Furthermore, I got a stern reprimand from my parents for being out of bed playing with my toys well past my bedtime. Their bedroom was directly below the storage closet / play area, and had heard the creaking of the rocking horse shuffling around the room. The next ghost story is one that I'm not too big of a fan of. It involves a ghost that follows someone for years. My older sister has a ghost that's followed her around for years. I lived with her once for about 3 months, and so much weird stuff happened in that time. All my sister would say to me when I mentioned it was that her ghost, quote, didn't like me being there. Things like going to bed with everything locked up and switched off, and waking up in the morning with the back door open, lights on, and the kettle switched on. One night, my sister and I had been getting ready to go out, and I asked to borrow her liquid foundation. I used it and put it back where she kept her makeup. 10 minutes later, she was asking me for it, and it was nowhere to be seen. She accused me of taking it and made me buy her a new one, and refused to listen to my side of the story. About a year or so later, when she was packing to move to a new house, she found the makeup in a shoebox with some old letters. The shoebox was in a zipped up suitcase that was underneath her bed. But probably the most scared I ever felt was one afternoon when I was the only one in the house, which never happened as 4 other people lived there. I'd arrived home from work and headed straight to the bathroom. All the doors, windows, etc. were closed. I was standing in the bathroom when I heard a female voice in the hall say, quote, "Stop picking your zits." It was loud enough and sounded real enough, and at the time, I thought it was my sister. So I laughed and told her to fuck off and asked what she was doing for dinner. No answer. I stuck my head out into the hall. No one was there. I searched the house top to bottom, and there was no one home. I sat out on the front porch until someone else got home because I didn't want to be in there alone anymore. So our next one is a story that our teller says they don't tell very often. They promise sincerely that it has scared and scarred them for life. And like most, they have looked into psychological explanations for what our teller has heard and even natural explanations for what occurred. But everyone has remained unsatisfactory. So, listeners, maybe you can come up with an explanation. When I was a child, I was scared of the dark. I swore to my mother I heard voices in it. They were not evil, but they were not familiar, and so they scared me. It was not uncommon in the middle of the night for me to wake up and hear, quote, whispers, as I would call them, when my mom asked. She figured they were just, quote, bumps in the night and typical kids' nightmare material. I tried often to explain to her that it was more than that they sounded different from one another the way people's voices do. On some nights, I would get so scared from these, quote, whispers that I would sleep in my mom's bed with her. It was an added bonus that the bathroom was directly outside of her bedroom door for my late night tinkles. I should add at this point that when walking out into the hall to go to the bathroom, you looked directly down the stairs that would lead you into my living room on the first floor, as my mom's bedroom was on the second floor. On one such night, around Christmas, I awoke and felt the need to relieve myself. I walked out from the door distinctly and heard the phrase, "Look!" And to my astonishment, a red light, almost like a spotlight, was cast upon the wall at the very bottom of the stairs. The light had no other source. It was by itself, and I was fixated by it. Being a little kid, and it was only a few days from Christmas, I knew what light this was. It was Santa. How else could he get into my house to know I was being a good boy? I was so excited, I began walking down the stairs to greet him, picking up my pace after the second step as it began to creep off the wall and fade into the darkness in my living room. That's when I heard him. A very strong, masculine voice. Different from the first, not at all like my father's. Not to say he isn't masculine, it's just distinctively different. It said, "Stop right now, go back up those stairs." I listened, turned around, and what happened next? I am not sure I would believe if someone had told me this same story. After reaching the top of the stairs, I heard a very loud crash that sent me running back to my mother's bed, where I jumped straight under the covers and stayed there the whole night. When we awoke the next morning, the poinsettia lights, little Christmas flower lights that glow red, that my mother had put on the railing down the stairs were pulled straight down to the bottom of the stairs. Some broken for what seemed like a forceful tear, laying in a single pile. The dry sink in my living room had fallen from the wall. My mother could not explain it. My father was worried that we had been the victim of a home invasion. My sister was crying. There was nothing missing. Nobody had broken in. There did not seem to be any reason this had happened. And then I saw it. And I kept quiet about it because I was so afraid that I could not force the words out of my mouth. There on the edge of the wooden, dry sink, which had been facing up, were 3 indentions where the finish on the wood had been worn, almost as if in a forceful grip. Something down there had grabbed it and threw it down. That was what the bang was. I was mortified. After that day, I'd never heard a single voice again. I do not like to imagine what was waiting downstairs for me that night, if it was anything at all, but I can tell you that the reality was that something had physically acted upon 2 things in my house near the bottom of that stairwell. After this, I'd never heard another whisper again, which is sad because in some ways I would have liked to thank the man, quote, masculine energy, that had stopped me from going down those stairs. This happened to me when I was 7. I'm 20 years old now, and because of this incident, I am still afraid of the dark, especially shadowy stairwells. So we all love when our grandpas sit us down and tell us stories, right? Well, our next story isn't your typical grandpa story. My grandfather told me this story about how one time he was sitting in a chair in front of the house when he heard his wife repeatedly calling him from inside the house. The thing is, my grandmother passed away a few years before that. But he told me that the voice was so pressing that he actually got up to look inside the house. And as soon as he got inside, he heard a loud crash behind him and turned around to see that the chair he had been sitting in moments ago had been crushed by the cast iron gutter that fell on it. If he hadn't have come inside the house, he would have probably been seriously injured. I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but every time I think about it, it sends chills down my spine. Our next one is going to make you think twice about babysitting. I was babysitting my niece once while I was staying at my brother's place, and they had the baby camera set up so I could see her on the little TV it came with. I was studying and started to doze off when I heard some whispering and realized it was coming from the monitor. I initially thought it was some feedback or something, but when I looked at the TV but when I looked at the TV, there was a dark shadow near my niece's crib. I've never been more terrified in my life, but the shadow was clearly there where it had not been before. I ran to my niece's room and looked around, but saw nothing. I took her the hell out of there anyway. I went back to the TV, and the shadow was clearly gone. I told my brother what happened, and he pulled me aside and told me not to mention it to my sister-in-law because she'd freak out. But that he had seen that same thing several times now, with the same whispering. But they stayed in that house for about 4 more years. And when my niece was just starting to talk, she would tell her mom about her, quote, special friend. To this day, it scares the shit out of me. When they moved out, my brother told me my niece had been inconsolably sad because she would miss her, quote, friend. Her mom would tell her she could bring him along, and all she would say was that he couldn't leave the house. We have never to this day told her about that damn shadow, and she apparently never saw it. And this shadow babysitting story leads us into our next. I didn't know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, and I was alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and a living room on one side, then a bathroom with two entrances. On the other side of the bathroom, there was a hallway that had windows in one side and two bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom, and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I just noticed movement at the corner of my eye. And so I looked. There was an honest to God, this gives me goosebumps, just typing this 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved. Like electricity arching. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid. Just like, what the fuck? Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen. Because it just fucking came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I had no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closet to me just slammed shut. I screamed, I yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went the fuck outside into the daylight and didn't go back until she got home about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural, but I know I saw something. I just don't know what it was. Our next story is either going to make you go running to Google Maps or it's going to make you stay away from them forever. A friend of mine showed me how to use Google Maps. I'm sure you've seen it. It lets you use satellite images to look at locations all over the world. A few years ago, I was in a car accident. Since then, I really don't leave the house that often. It's difficult, and the idea of seeing a car drive by me makes me feel lightheaded. Tonight, I was fascinated by the fact that I could see all over the world, almost like being there. I could virtually walk down the streets, and it almost felt like I was really there. I became instantly hooked. It gave me a real eye on the world. I could go to almost any major city, and I did. I'd seen the streets in China, Japan, Germany, and England. So many places. I'd even gone to tourist attractions like the Great Barrier Reef and Dracula's Castle. My favorite was to go to random places in major cities and see how many people and animals I could find. The faces of the people were always blurred to protect their privacy, of course, but it was still enjoyable to see them out there, enjoying their lives, walking like it was no big deal. She must have good taste, I laughed, as I zoomed in closer and noticed the gray bag a woman carried on a gray and purple shoulder strap. She was walking in a relaxed manner, one hand trailing the wall beside her. I bet if I could have seen her face, I would see that she was smiling. I began to feel a bit sad. I let my hands fall onto the arms of my wheelchair and looked at her for a minute more. I wished that I could be there, walking so carefree with her. That wouldn't happen, though, until I died. I was stuck in this chair. I sighed and zoomed out of Tokyo. Enough of this for tonight. I turned off the computer and went to bed. I got up early the next day and decided to look around Paris. Paris was always fun. I liked the look of the city, with all the old, beautiful buildings and so many people to watch. I randomly zoomed to an area and saw a street lined with old brick buildings, a few small shops, and an old tan brick church. Ahead was an intersection, and dozens of people walked by. A balding businessman walked quickly past, looking back at an old woman, hair covered with a scarf, carrying a large purse. A curvy woman in black pants that were too tight stared into a store window, and two women led a group of small children around a corner. I spun the view around a few more times and then saw something peculiar. Sitting on the bench at the bus stop were two people. One of them was a young woman with her feet stuck in front of her in a relaxed manner. She was wearing a pair of red sneakers like my own. I was startled for a moment as I noticed the black pants, white t-shirt, and black hooded jacket. Her brown hair was tied loosely behind her head. A gray bag sat on the bench beside her, the shoulder strap hooked over her shoulder. This is crazy, I thought. It can't possibly be the same woman. This is a different country, different continent even. How could it be her? This was stupid. It wasn't even as if they were live photographs. They were taken ahead of time and then stored. It's not like she was in two places at once. She could just be a traveler. Besides, without seeing her face, it was impossible to tell it was the same person. Brown hair was probably the most common hair color in the world. Those red sneakers were something I purchased online. I'm sure a million other people did too. I shook my head and went on to fix some lunch. When I got back online, I decided to look at Berlin. I picked a random street, as usual. It looked pretty empty. There were brick buildings lining the streets, looking more like factories than anything else. There were also empty lots full of long grass and piled gravel. There wasn't much to see at all, really. There was a line of motorbikes and a car with two German flags sticking up from it. After more searching, I found one kid. He looked like he was dressed for school, a jacket thrown over his bag. He was intently looking at some kind of mobile device. I was disappointed. I started to leave, but then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I turned the view, and there they were, those damned red sneakers. She was standing on a street corner, next to some kind of signpost. She had one hand on the post looking down the street as if waiting to cross the street. I stared in shock. How could she be there too? Even if she was traveling, there's no way I would find her every time. Even finding her in Paris would have been one heck of a coincidence. But this was crazy. Was this some kind of joke? Had Google decided to play a prank on its users that used their product too much? It would have been a great joke. I did a quick search looking for a note about a woman who shows up like Waldo. There was nothing. I looked through articles on strange things you see on Google Maps, but none of them mentioned the woman that travels the world with you. This was crazy. Had my self-imposed isolation driven me mad? Had I become so lonely I created a hallucination for myself? Leaving the Berlin image on the screen, I sent a text message to a friend, asking him to look at the locations. I asked him if he saw the same woman. Then I waited, hands sweating, heart thumping in my chest, jumped when my phone beeped with a return text message 10 minutes later. The text read, "I see the lady you're talking about in Berlin. I don't see her in Paris or Tokyo. Is this some kind of game or what? Are you okay?" I didn't respond, instead returning to the locations in Tokyo and Paris. There she was. She was there, but it was different. She no longer sat on the bus stop bench in Paris. She was standing in front of it, looking for something in her bag. In Tokyo, she was blocks away, squatting down to pet a calico cat. I shivered. Who was she? What was happening? I switched to the map in Brussels. It was another city street. It was lined with old-looking buildings with shops on ground level and what I guessed were apartments above. I quickly scanned the streets. They were empty, other than a stocky woman in a bright blue sweater. I did a second sweep. She wasn't there. I sighed in relief. I couldn't believe I was getting so worked up about this. It was nothing but a coincidence. I stopped, my eyes frozen on the screen. There was a building at the back point of a fork in the road, white with a black ironwork framed balcony jutting from the second floor. I hadn't seen her as I'd been looking at the sidewalks. But there she stood, standing on the balcony, her head tilted in the direction of the camera. almost like she was coyly looking toward me, my breath caught in my throat. I switched to Sydney. She was leaning against the wall inside the doorway of a bright blue Carrick's pharmacy building. London showed her getting ready to step onto a red double-decker bus, her head turned to look over her shoulder. She was everywhere I looked. She stood on a brick sidewalk on a bridge in Venice. She walked across a yellow barred crosswalk in Zurich and in Hong Kong. And she stood between a Wing Lung Bank and a McDonald's, adjusting the strap on her bag. In each picture, she came closer and closer to looking directly at me with her blurred-out face. My heart felt like a terrified bird slamming around inside my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the police. Should I send screenshots to Google? I clenched my fists tightly and closed my eyes. Who was she? Was she following me? Was I following her? I wish I could see the expression on her face. Know what she saw when she looked back at me. I wanted to get out of the chair and run. Why is it that the only thing that made me feel free again was the only thing that made me feel even more trapped? I had to know. I typed in the name of my town and zoomed into a random street. It was a couple of miles from my house. The gates to the city park were shown in the clarity of daylight, despite it being night here. There she was. There she was. She was only a few miles from my house, standing under the ironwork arc that stated the name of the park. She looked directly at the camera, directly at me. I felt like I might throw up. She was near me, and she was watching me. She was coming for me. What did she want? I typed in the name of the apartment complex where I live. I could see the outside of the building. The parking lot was full of cars, and there were a few blurred-out children on the playground. I searched everywhere for her. She wasn't in the parking lot or on the sidewalks, not hiding between the buildings or standing in the playground. I even scanned each of the cars, behind the bushes, and each of the blurred windows. She wasn't there. I curled tightly around myself and laid my head on the desk. This place was safe. I didn't leave the apartment anyway. I would never use Google Maps again. I would never see her again. She could even stay at the park for all I cared. I smiled to myself and was surprised to find a tear slipping down my face. I'm safe, I said to myself in a whisper. It felt good to hear it out loud. I'm safe. As I said it, there was a knock at the door. A chill ran down my spine. I had a camera hooked to my computer to show who was at the front door, which made it easier for me, with my mobility issues and all. I slowly reached for the control to show myself who was outside, but my hand trembled furiously. As I touched the control, I realized my mistake. The last of Google's images that I had been only showed the outside of my building. Just the outside. I looked at the screen and saw a woman in a white t-shirt, black pants, black hooded jacket, and carrying a gray bag with a purple and gray striped shoulder strap. Of course, there were those red sneakers. She looked directly at the camera, her face still a complete blur. As I tried to stifle a scream, she raised a hand and knocked loudly on my front door. Whew, those are some stories. Hopefully, they had all of you on the edge of your seats. Hopefully, you liked them and enjoyed this week's episode. I will be back next week with our new full-time co-host and our last spooky episode for 2024. I hope you all keep listening, and remember to watch for monsters and don't kill people. Bye, y'all.